morning, everyone. I appreciate you being here and sticking around. And I know we'll have more people trickle in. Today I'm talking about one of my favorite topics, which is catching and keeping talent in healthcare facilities, particularly the trades. A huge passion of mine. I spent a lot of time in my career and also my volunteer work, specifically recruiting and keeping people from the trades into healthcare facilities management. Typically when I deliver this presentation, it's over an hour or more. So I've condensed that down into 2 hours, and 20 minutes really is what I want to get through the highlights. I'm happy to talk after and this afternoon if you're willing to stick around in the Arizona heat. Otherwise, you can contact me and we can talk one-on-one. With the few minutes that we have remaining, I want to hear from you. I think that's the beauty of being a consultant, is that I have the perspective of working with hundreds of healthcare facilities across the nation, which allows me to share information, understand what's happening in different regions and markets, especially as we're continuing to change our healthcare landscape. So this is a topic that I've been hearing for all of my career, right? People in the trades are exiting. We don't have enough people coming in. The average age of a facility manager is 50 plus. I've spoken myself about the silver tsunami, but not everyone is experiencing that, and not everyone is dealing with it the same way. So even though this seems to be an age-old problem, the way that we're addressing it now is quite contemporary. Especially after COVID, things have changed dramatically in how we're recruiting and retaining talent, especially in the trades. So what I want to do today is open up that dialogue with all of you. I'm interested in hearing about what you're doing specifically or what your pain points are, so we can have that conversation of, what is working and what is working in different marketplaces in acute care versus your clinics, and behavioral health versus what's happening in the Pacific Northwest compared to the Southeast. So I am Lindsey Brackett. Yep, that's me. My company is Legacy FM, and I'm a consultant that comes from engineering and construction. I've spent most of my career working in healthcare. In 2018, I founded Legacy FM based on the Legacy Project. So after hearing for more than a decade, about 15 years, about how so many people are exiting the trades and not enough people coming in, I'm like, why are we still talking about this? Why does this continue to be a problem? And a lot of it boils down to awareness and also capturing information, the legacy information from those who are exiting the industry. I find that in some markets, people actually aren't leaving. I spoke to a healthcare executive last week, and he said, it's not that we don't have enough people. There are enough, kids and veterans and people who are interested in a career in the trades. Our problem is we can't get people to leave. And I said, wow, that's refreshing. When I go and talk to other people, they're like, wow, we can't find enough people. We have all these open positions, and they've been open for months, in some cases more than a year. But he's saying, and he's in North Carolina, that no, we have too many people and we can't get them to leave. Any of you have a plant operator who's in their 70s or 80s? Yeah, some people do, right? It's a real thing. And so part of the Legacy Project is giving them a legacy to pass on to the next generation, and to really take that institutional knowledge and put it into really a meaningful purpose. Because what I hear too often is when someone's about to retire, they're like, hey, we should probably take all the information that you've amassed over the last 40, 50 years and try to dig that out of your brain in, 5-10 days? What's left? And that's really tough. So one of the things that we intentionally do is harvest that institutional knowledge so we can memorialize it, update it, pass it on for the next generation. I'm also going to be talking about a couple of the volunteer projects that I work on, either through ASHE. I'm an advisory board member for the American Society for Healthcare Engineering, so I work with them on succession planning strategies. We have a partnership with another organization that I work with, which is the IFMA FM Pipeline, which is dedicated to recruiting high school students, post-secondary students, veterans into the trades. I, of course, advocate for healthcare facilities management, So what that looks like is we go to these big events where they're looking for scholarships, like competitions where they're looking for scholarships to be in the trades, and we put them through a competition, and through that we expose them to facilities management or healthcare facilities management. So maybe you've got a high school student that's wanting to be a mechanic, and I'm like, hey, we've got generators. Like, those are pretty cool. Or we've got, a high school kid, and he's like, I just want to be, a carpenter. And I'm like, we build things in hospitals, like, all the time. And it gets them exposed to a career that they didn't know existed. And honestly, I find that that's part of the problem, is that we're not communicating to the next generation or even to veterans to provide them with that career path into facilities management. And once they understand that that's an option, and we have more formal certificate programs or education programs, it becomes really intriguing. Because as you know, facilities management is quite dynamic. You have to know about business and regulatory, infection prevention. There's so much to know, and every hour is a new hour. And that's very attractive to a lot of people who don't want to sit behind a desk or a computer. They want to do something that's meaningful work in healthcare. So who in here has seen this quote before from Henry Ford? The only thing worse than training your employees and having them leave is not training them and having them stay. Yeah, and that's honestly the number one reason why a lot of facility directors choose to not invest in training, because for some markets it's so competitive that they're worried that they're going to invest in someone for them to go leave for $1.50 more an hour. And that's a real concern. I would argue that in healthcare, we have to really appreciate why we're there. If you think about your most loved person, right, in this world, who's your most loved person? And if they're a patient in your hospital, does that change how you do your job or how you want your teams to do their job? A lot of people, they say yeah. But should it? Because every patient is someone's most loved person. And so I would say that your teams should be trained so that way they're not causing harm or unknowingly causing harm to someone's most loved person. And that's the argument. It's different in healthcare. The risk is higher in healthcare. This was a statistic from Investopedia. 42 days to fill an open position and 6 to 8 months to reach full productivity. 42 days isn't actually very long. How many of you have open positions in your hospitals right now? And have they been open for longer than 42 days? Yeah. 6 to 8 months of full productivity. I find that really difficult to believe in healthcare, considering, first of all, how vast the campuses are. A lot of times it takes them weeks, sometimes months, to even figure out what room number 6-23750 is, and they get lost. And by the way, there's no cell service in the basement of a hospital, so they're just trying to go and find where they need to do their work, let alone the complicated systems. There's no med gas in any other building occupancy. There's not pneumatic tube systems. There's not central utility plants and district energy systems. So things are different. So I would say 6 to 8 months is pretty optimistic to reach full productivity in healthcare. And then onboarding costs between $2,800 and $4,400 per employee. So this is why it's so important, knowing the lead time it takes for someone to become productive, to become autonomous, and also the time invested into even onboarding them, why it's so important to retain talent in healthcare. And especially because of the high-risk environment and everything they have to know. I was in a facility one time, and I met a technician. It was his second week. So he'd gone through onboarding his first week, and they deployed him out, and he was servicing an elevator. He was telling me a story about how the fire alarm went off when he was servicing an elevator, and he didn't know what to do. And he stayed in the elevator. And no one ever thought to tell him about defend in place or life safety as part of his onboarding. And by the way, during a fire, you don't want to be in an elevator. And things are just different in healthcare. And we forget how much we've learned through our career and experience in the healthcare environment between life safety, infection prevention and control, just the way that we're doing our maintenance and construction activities, the impact that can have on healthcare-associated infections. We forget about all the complicated systems and the maintenance strategies and AEM and RCM, how CapEx is different than OpEx, and by the way, how healthcare is a customer service environment. We rely on HCAPs, or most of us do, for Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement. But that information doesn't get passed on to enough frontline staff. And it's not because they're unwilling to learn, they don't want to learn, it's just no one has incorporated that into their onboarding and their education. All right, so let's state the obvious between someone who's engaged and trained versus not. Someone who is engaged takes ownership of their work. They're accountable for their performance, and they're ambassador for the organization's mission. So important in healthcare, right? They have to own the mission. And I find a lot of people who work in healthcare have a calling to serve in healthcare. And by the way, they're less likely to leave for $1.50 an hour because they're engaged and they believe in the mission, and that's enough. When they're trained, they are confident to make decisions as close to the work as possible. They're not checking in with their supervisor to see what the next step is or what the next, the master journeyman, what is the right decision here. By the way, they're not bringing someone else in from a service contractor to fix really basic problems. They want to learn. And by being trained, they're making decisions as close to the work as they can so they can go on and do more great work. They make fewer mistakes and they're more vigilant with their performance quality compared to untrained employees. Someone who's disengaged, they underperform and they blame others. It's their fault. I don't have enough resources. They don't know what they don't know, and they don't really care. And by the way, they're hunting for their job while on this one. When they're untrained, they're likely to make mistakes that have adverse patient outcomes. And that's the scary part, is they don't know what they don't know, and so they're making decisions thinking they're doing great work. And I see this all the time in healthcare facilities management. These are people who want to get things done. They're hands-on, they want to get out there, they want to be in the field, they have a calling to serve, they're just trying to do good work. But when they're not trained, they don't know what they don't know, and they make mistakes. They don't really understand the impact of those mistakes. And they're less productive and less efficient than their trained counterparts. When I think about what's important for success when you're recruiting talent into your healthcare facilities, as well as keeping them engaged and retained, there are a few things that come to mind. First and foremost is having a partnership with human resources. And this might seem obvious, except I see how it is mishandled time and time again. In human resources, in a hospital setting, they're focused on clinicians, nurses, and oftentimes they don't understand what is facilities management. And they will turn people away who are qualified for that position, not knowing that they're qualified. So it's really important that you're working with them to say, okay, this is exactly what the scope of work is. This is the type of person that we're looking for. Experience matters, but not all experience is the same. Not all certifications are the same. And by the way, we can transfer skills. So if they're a veteran, veterans are great. They rise to the occasion. They have leadership skills. They know how to respond to chaos. They're quick on their feet. But if your human resources department isn't looking looking for veterans and working with things like SkillBridge or the DoD, they might have a market of people that they're not tapping into. That brings me to the next point, which is developing a talent pool pipeline. Human resources can help with this. Many of you might be in markets where you have trade schools or post-secondary schools. I mentioned the high school students that I often work with through the FM pipeline program. But it's really important to establish a dedicated pipeline. so that you're not being so reactive. That way, when your 70-year-old plant operator decides to retire, you have someone who's willing to take that place. And by the way, that you've engaged with that institution, informing them of these are the skills that we want you to bake into your curriculum. This is what's important, whether it's emerging technologies, whether it's specialty systems, soft skills are so important. There's a certificate program at Boston University. I'm a guest lecturer there, and they bring me in to teach construction and facility students about soft skills because they recognize the importance of quality communication, of proper project management, of collaborating with other departments, about customer service. And wouldn't it be nice if you had someone that was ready in your pipeline who understood those skills and was ready to go? Intentional and continuous employee engagement is also really important. And I have a few recommendations of what this could look like. For someone that's been in your facilities for a number of years, at some point they might get bored. So how are you keeping them engaged? They feel like they have an opportunity to continuously grow. For example, are there lateral job positions for them to move into from a tradesperson? Do they understand what the career growth path looks like? I've worked with the healthcare system, and in all of their shops and in their plants, they have this huge laminated poster. And it shows exactly what you need to do to get from a Tech 1 through a Tech 4 to a supervisor or a lead to a manager. And then they also show the bridges to cross over to a compliance manager or an energy specialist. So it's clear to everyone exactly what they need to do in terms of education and experience, licensure, certification to move from one position to the next. And then, of course, competitive compensation, right? It's important that you're really thinking about who are your competitors in your market. A lot of times it's your construction companies. What we find is that people who come from construction into facilities, it's usually they're looking for a climate-controlled environment. We can appreciate that here in Scottsdale. They're looking to work indoors because it's brutal. It's brutal to work outdoors in some of those environments in construction. They also want to know what city they're going to work in. Many times they've had to be away from their families. They don't know where their next project is going to be, and they've been on the road and traveling, and they're looking for stability. So having those benefits, again, working with your human resources department, so you're highlighting those, but also thinking about, okay, what are fair wages in construction? And if we can't compete dollar for dollar, what are some of the benefits that we can offer? And what's the compensation package look like? It all starts with job descriptions. I find that in many cases, job descriptions are not updated as often as they should be. We might put together a job description from 10, 20 years ago, and that tends to get recycled and reused and copied and pasted, and they stop making sense at some point. What that does in your market is it confuses people. They don't know what job they're applying for. What I find is that when you're really clear about your competencies, I would recommend no more than 10, really clear about what are the competencies required for that job so you can measure their outcomes. That's really important when you're keeping people engaged, because when they understand how competencies are connected to outcomes, they can answer that question that we all want to answer is, am I doing a good job? Am I doing a good job? So when you create your job descriptions, make them super, super, super clear about what exactly they're going to be doing in your healthcare facilities, so they know the job that they're applying for. The other thing is that you're removing unnecessary requirements. I one time saw an entry-level carpenter position in a healthcare facility requiring 3 years of experience in healthcare. Where are you going to find that person? I see all the time where it's required to have a CHFM or other credentialing, and you're excluding a group of people who probably have the aptitude to meet whatever requirement. They just either haven't been exposed to it, they don't know about it, they haven't been provided reimbursement opportunities through tuition programs at your facilities. So is it required or is it preferred? Because sometimes you might have a high school student who's worked for their dad's construction company for a few years, and they want a job. They don't want to go to college. That's not the typical career path for them. They don't want to go to a trade school. They're interested in doing construction. They've heard about facilities management, but maybe they've been excluded because they don't have any healthcare experience. So I really challenge you to go back to your job descriptions and look at what is truly required versus what is preferred. And if something is preferred, what are you doing as an organization to help them build up that skills and experience? When you're recruiting, so now you've got your job descriptions set, it's also really helpful to bring in someone in the interview process who understands that scope of work and is actually understanding the questions that you're asking for your candidates. And what I mean by that is oftentimes the interview process, the questions will be developed by human resources, and they'll largely have to do with behavior. Well, in the trades, behavior, of course, is important, but how do you determine if someone has the right skills or competencies? How do you know that they have basic controls knowledge or plant operations knowledge or maintenance knowledge? How do you know just because they're a journeyman electrician that they're going to be able to operate your essential electrical systems? So I highly recommend in that recruiting process, in the hiring process, that you're bringing in more skills assessments so they can understand what you're starting out with, what your baseline knowledge is. Also pay attention to attention. When someone is looking for a job in facilities management, are they going to LinkedIn? Probably not. They're probably going to a trade magazine. They might have different listservs that they're a part of. They might be going to local job fairs. They might be on TikTok. And so I always say, where are people looking for jobs? Because sometimes we're posting jobs thinking that we're reaching some target audience. We're totally missing them because we're not paying attention to where they are paying attention. So here are some different avenues as you're thinking about recruitment. Mentioned Skills USA, that's that high school letter jacket program that connects trade schools with different scholarships into post-secondary education and directly into their careers. They've got a really great competition series that goes from state to state, and then they go to a national competition every year where you can actually award them those scholarships and interviews with facilities like yours. I mentioned partnering with local trade schools. SkillBridge, of course, was developed by the DoD. It's connecting veterans to different job opportunities as they're making that transition. Posting and trade publications, that's huge. Participating in public and college job fairs and having a booth with human resources so you can actually explain what facilities management does in your own language. And then engaging in industry listservs. So you might be part of member organizations that have a listserv. That's a benefit of your membership. So think about posting there. All right, as far as career growth, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but it is really important to be very clear about how someone moves up in your organization if they have that desire. You know, is it qualitative and just based on behavior and you're doing a good job? Or is there some component of your building competencies? Do you have a competency matrix for your department? Surveyors love seeing that, where you've taken your job description and you've identified all the competencies for each job position, and you've developed internal training perhaps so that you can build skills from one position to the next. Surveyors like it because you can say, look, this person met the competency for their job. They've trained on how to do it. We verified that. They're qualified to do the work. And then also having bridges between one position to the next. So that someone who comes from a trade, maybe they're a plumber or electrician, maybe they're working in your plant, and they're interested in compliance. Do you have a way for them to migrate from one shop to the next shop or one position to a different department? Maybe you can connect with your EVS team. You know, someone who is currently working as an EVS tech, but they have an aspiration to do something more. They feel like they can do more and give more. Do you have a way to recruit them into facilities management and build up their skills? And succession planning really starts as soon as you take on a new position. As soon as you can, start looking around you to see, okay, who can I start training to fill this position? or when your 7-year-old plant operator retires, you've already identified someone who can take that position. One way that I see healthcare systems handling this is through leadership programs. Internally building a leadership program for their facilities and construction teams. I'm currently working with an organization where they put a year-long program together that covers compliance, project management, finance, operations and maintenance strategies, leadership styles. And even though not everyone who's applied and been accepted into that program is a supervisor or manager, some of them are, they recognize that one day they will be. So rather than waiting for them to be promoted into the next position and then trying to quickly build up those skills, they started laying down that foundation sometimes a year or 2 years in advance. So that way when they are promoted, they already have those skills in place. All right, so for those of you who have people you're wanting to keep, and they're not ready for them to retire yet, how do you keep them engaged? They're not leaving for $1.50 more an hour. I was really surprised to come across these statistics from Inc.com. This is from 2022, so it's a couple of years old. These are indicators of employee turnover compared to compensation. This number one is huge for me, toxic corporate culture, toxic work environment. A toxic work environment is 10 times more important than compensation. Is anyone surprised by that? I mean, that's huge, 10 times. But when we think about it, when people leave their organization, sometimes it's for pay, if it's an amazing job opportunity, but you're not looking for that unless you're miserable at work, right? You're not just going out job hunting unless something's wrong with your leadership. Maybe you're burnt out. Maybe you've run into a dead end and you're no longer growing at work and there's no lateral move for you, so you start looking. And it has to do with having a toxic work culture. Job insecurity and reorganization. This is really prevalent in healthcare because in healthcare, first of all, our landscape is incredibly disruptive right now as we continue to go with advancing technologies into AI, into more outpatient-based and home health and telemedicine. So how we're constructing and operating our healthcare facilities continues to change drastically. Part of that is all the mergers and acquisitions that are taking place because the business landscape has demanded that we continue to merge different healthcare systems together just to survive. So when you see all of these changes happening, and for some of you, you've probably experienced this yourself, so as mergers are taking place and acquisitions are taking place, you start looking around and thinking, what does this mean for me? And if you were thinking that, you better believe your teams are thinking that. They're wondering, even if someone 2 or 3 levels above them moves or that position is eliminated, they're definitely thinking about what does this mean for me? And when that happens, they start looking for other opportunities because they want to secure their job position. High levels of innovation. Why would that be 3 times more likely to indicate turnover than compensation? People don't want to change. Yeah. So I'm a fan of innovation. There can be times when it's very scary for your teams to take on a new platform, a new process, new legislation, new technology. Healthcare innovates all the time. And especially for your trades who come in, they want to get their hands on equipment, they want to do good work. You know, oftentimes it's difficult for them to even keep up with the technology, even computers. You know how many times that I've heard the need for computer training? I was working with an HVAC technician this morning, and he's never used Zoom before. You think he's thinking about ChatGPT and AI and wearables and home health? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. He's running away from that. And innovation can be really, really scary for our trades because they don't understand it. They don't work with it. Their job doesn't necessarily depend on it, especially in some of our older facilities. Failure to recognize performance. This really applies to any organization. You might not know this, but facilities management people don't really get a lot of recognition for their work. They might only get called on when something's gone wrong, right? They're usually in the basement. I can't think of anyone, I met one person who was like, you know what, I want a job in healthcare facilities management. But there are no kids out there who are thinking, like, one day I want to work at a hospital, but I don't want to be like a surgeon. I don't want to be a radiologist. I want to work in the basement. That doesn't occur to anyone as a career path. And yet so many people find themselves in healthcare facilities management, and they don't get recognized enough. And that's because they don't really get paid attention to unless something goes wrong. No one really points out all the times they prevent the bad thing from happening or how quickly they were able to respond on site. So recognition is really, really important in healthcare facilities. This last one, even though 2022, poor response to COVID, of course, that had an impact on our workforce. But if you really think about, okay, what does that mean, poor response to COVID? That could be really to anything, civil unrest. That could be to the business environment. That could be to new technologies that are being adopted into your healthcare facilities. What this means is just really big change. How does an organization respond to big change, whether it's in the community, maybe it's more global than that, but they're going to be looking to their leadership to say, okay, what does this mean for me? How are you responding? And do I still believe in you as the leader? Do I still believe in your mission? The good news is there are also 4 actions to boost retention. Lateral job opportunities, of course, where people start to feel bored and they want to take on a new challenge. Remote work options, of course, isn't always the case in facilities management, but there are positions where you can offer remote work opportunities. As a small business owner, I can't compete in a lot of ways to larger organizations. This is something that I can do, and what I find is that I get a really top talent who are willing to come to my company because we offer fully remote work environments, and that's a really big deal for them. Even the option to work, one day a month from home or one day a week from home. Maybe it's flexible work hours, but people, especially through COVID, they've figured out this is nice to be able to stay at home and put on my slippers and be in an environment that I'm comfortable in and get snacks when I want them and not have to have people come and take my attention when I'm in the middle of putting together a report or an email or in a meeting, whatever it is. Corporate social events. So this could be your team barbecues or lunches, your Christmas parties, your holiday parties, but this could also be extended to the family. In facilities management, what I find is that skilled laborers, they come in to work, they enjoy what they do because they're not being hassled. They can come in, kind of stay to themselves, keep to themselves, get their hands on some equipment, and go home knowing that they made a difference. They don't always go home and talk about their work because to them it's just, an everyday job. But their families don't always understand why they're getting phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning, or why they're having to work overtime, or why they have to come in on the weekends. And so when you're thinking about your social events, your corporate events, if you can bring in more of your family, maybe it's a ball game, maybe you've taken them out into a big park in your community and that's the barbecue and you invite their families to join, that makes a huge difference. It checks off that box of recognition, but you're also recognizing the family for the sacrifices they make when your facilities person is taking that call at 2 o'clock in the morning, when they're having to miss some sort of family event to be there on the weekend because there's some sort of emergency. Predictable schedules are also really important, and that's why we can recruit from construction oftentimes, is because we can say this is exactly where you're going to work, this is the schedule we're going to stick to, and that level of stability is really attractive for a lot of the trades. Okay, so what would cause someone to disengage? So these are things to look for before they actually start looking for that next position, before the turnover starts to happen. Usually they're not receiving enough information. So a highly evolving work environment like healthcare facilities, changes happen all the time, whether it's a policy change or technology. I know of several organizations where leadership changes every 3 to 5 years, sometimes more. They might have a new boss every other month because of all the mergers and acquisitions and the problems we're seeing with retention, even in leadership. So through this change is we forget to communicate that down to every level. And people are always asking that question, what does this mean for me? There's this really great scene in Mad Men. Anyone watched Mad Men? Yes, great show. There's this one scene where the production team, they're like working out in the cubicles, and the leadership team has gone into the executive's office. And the production team is watching all the executives kind of filter into the office, and the blinds close, and they start to huddle around. What do you think they're talking about? And they start to guess what they think they're talking about. And they think they're talking about them as a production team. Well, obviously you messed up. Obviously you're going to get fired. They always think it's about them. And it's never about them. But without the full story, without the information, people are going to create the story, and they're going to make it about them. And by the way, when they're talking about what this means for me, what are they not doing? They're not working. They're not working. Yeah. That's why it's so important to communicate what is actually happening the best that you can. Of course, you can't always share every information, like every piece of information, but there's probably some things that you can share. Or if they see you as a manager or a leader going to a lot of meetings, maybe you can't say what every meeting is about, but maybe you can give them an idea that you're going to, the decisions you're making in these meetings or some of the topics that you're discussing. First of all, to give them that reassurance that they're not going to get fired or their production isn't suffering, but also so they feel more connected to you as a leader and a manager. They can continue to buy into the mission, and they have that sense of security. Managers are so good at going to meetings. We're so good at going to meetings, but we're really, really bad at communicating the decisions and the actions that come from those meetings down to our production staff. They also don't know what they don't know. Great case in point with the example I gave about the technician working in an elevator during a fire alarm. He had no idea. And the more that you can incorporate the differences in healthcare into your onboarding process, because you're probably going to be hiring people who have no healthcare experience. That's just the world that we're living in. They worked in apartments or some other business occupancy, and they don't know about healthcare, but they need to. So help them fill in those gaps by baking that into your onboarding and training process. They also start to disengage when they see their manager doesn't have a backup plan. You'll really see people pull away from their manager when they don't have confidence in their leadership skills. And that tends to become evident during times of crises. So when things start to falling apart, they see their manager not either taking action, maybe their manager is blaming another department, maybe their own leader. They start to disengage because they lose trust in their manager or leader's ability to make decisions. And then also having too many opinions in the mix can lead to mediocre results. One of the leadership styles that are natural for some people is this democratic style. The democratic style of leadership is really great when you're working with a group of highly skilled people because everyone has enough experience and enough expertise to weigh in on the conversation. However, people who are naturally democratic leaders, they will pull everyone on their team regardless of how long they've been in the position, their knowledge base, just because they want to know that whatever decision they're going to make, they're going to have that buy-in, which is good. But sometimes it can lead to mediocre results. Or sometimes you have too many leaders and there isn't a leader. And that can be very confusing. And that oftentimes leads to either mediocrity or inaction. And you'll start to see people disengage because of that. So I wanted to open this up to you some key takeaways of what we talked about in terms of, starting out with the job descriptions, really working with your human resources department. Where's your pipeline coming from? How are you training your team from day one about why healthcare is different, so they aren't making decisions that are negatively impacting someone's most loved person? How do you continue to keep people engaged? How are you passing on information to them? And how are you developing the next leaders of healthcare facilities management? All right, great. Thank you so much.